All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, we've got Wheel of Time, Path of Daggers, a lot of Egwene, pretty much all Egwene
Yep.
storyline today, which is a big chunk. I mean, it's like 5 chapters. Now, if there's any hiccups, I am using a different laptop because I got a Chromebook for school and I'm testing it out to make sure it's working fine for this so I can use it when I'm on the road and stuff. So hopefully all goes as planned and we don't have to re-record this whole damn thing. But yeah, we're talking Path of Daggers today, and yeah, take it away.
Well, you're going to make my life difficult, I think, because you sent me a text last night when we were talking about what we're going to talk about, and how did you phrase it? Up to the point where Egwene becomes a tyrant?
I sent that this morning.
This morning. Okay, I'm old and
Yeah,
forgetful.
yeah.
Um, the I actually really like this
That's
section
why I
of
have
Egwene's
48
story.
Laws of Power up, by the way.
Yeah.
And also the Black Swan, because realistically, I was thinking about it. Uh, Rand is a Black Swan event.
Yeah,
And when you look at Black Swan
sure.
events, that's when everything gets turned on its head and tyrants can take over.
Mm.
So we're in that moment in time.
Um,
Obama.
I or if you convince people that you're in a black swan moment, that's another way
Hmm.
to do it. Anyway, um, actually, just as an aside, I like this long opening paragraph with her dreams, what she's been dreaming, especially about Matt. Recently, all of her dreams about Matt were pale and full of pain, like shadows cast by nightmares, almost as though Matt himself were not quite real. Dun 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 dun. And that's kind of our only Matt tease is the little bit of Egwene's dreaming and then a little bit of Elaine and Nynaeve worrying about him. But otherwise, sorry, Matt.
Yeah,
You're,
but at the same time, you're supposed to kind of get that maybe he's not alive kind of vibe, but she
mhm,
also has a future viewing about him at the same time,
right.
holding two Aes Sedai on a balance.
Yeah. Um, let's see here. Uh, I also like how it kind of drops us in the middle. Um, he's gonna do this again in the next book, actually, with how this one ends. Wait, or am I getting confused with the book after that? I don't know. We'll see where it goes. Um, because he doesn't need to, in much the same way that he said Matt's not doing anything important, so he didn't need to be in this book. You know, from when we last saw her finally getting everybody moving, and then he just kind of drops us here because there's obviously been a passage of time, but it wasn't anything that important. For instance, whoa, hey, what's Halima doing there? And as Egwene's, personal secretary servant lady. Uh, dun 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 again. So there's really kind of a couple big bombs that he drops just right in the first couple of pages. Oh,
Well,
hey,
and
what's going
and
on with that? Hey, what's Halima doing there?
and it's kind of funny with Halima there because when Egwene's getting dressed, she's like watching her with her beady eyes, and Egwene's got all these positive thoughts about it in her head,
Mm-hmm,
and I'm like,
mm-hmm,
yeah, that's Bethamel like eyeing you up and down right now,
mm-hmm.
wanting to lick his lips.
Yep, 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 yep. Um, well, and then another bomb here, a third one just a couple pages later, when Egwene asks Swan what it is. Not another revelation like the kin, I hope. She clicked her tongue in vexation. She was spent, too, by long freezing days in the saddle and not enough real sleep, or she would not have said that. I'm sorry, Swan. No need to apologize, mother, blah, blah, blah. So apparently we've already seen from the other side, from Elaine and Egwene's storyline, what the Aes Sedai knew about the kin or thought they knew about the kin. Um, and so he didn't need to rehash all that. He just drops this in, and we get after the fact the repercussions of that when Egwene finally learns of I'm supposed to be the leader, and you're just now telling me this, and this is kind of
Mhm.
a big effing deal.
But the answer was, I didn't think it was a big deal at the time.
Yeah, yeah. So I didn't think they were going to go find them, let alone talk to them, let alone incorporate them into their plans.
Yep. That's the old assume word.
Yep. Um, okay. So where do you want to go? Because you're the one that phrased it as Egwene becoming a tyrant. So where do you want to start? What do you want to kind of focus in on?
Well, I mean, realistically, we're in the events that lead up to it because I forgot my notes in the other room, but I can remember it mostly. One of the problems with the Egwene storyline is there are almost no good guys.
Hmm.
You've got Lelaine and Ramonda, conniving and maneuvering. They're kind of good guys, but they're not.
Yeah.
They both think they know what's best and they're both trying to get it done, but they're also overbearing and uh, not open-minded and well, I should say even very close-minded.
Yes.
You see that with Ramonda's remarks about the wind finders. How could they know how to do the wind better than an Aes Sedai? Again,
Yep.
it's that hubris. They're the definition of that hubris we've been talking about, and they're trying to manipulate Egwene. But also, there are a few comments within that maybe someday you will be ready, but right
Mhm.
now you're not, which actually gives a little bit of goodness inside them
Yeah.
that yeah, we just basically put an 18-year-old on the throne, but she does have promise. They're actually acknowledging that she has promise. It's just they can't fathom the lack of experience, which we've talked about this in our social episodes. One of the problems with women is when they're young, they want to be treated like they have all the experience in the world just because maybe they may be a little bit smart or have seen one or two things.
Mhm.
And this is where Egwene is at. And they acknowledge that. And they're also very close-minded in their doing so. And then you've got Swan, who's got her own machinations, and she's trying to do good, but she's also part of the reason they're in this mess. And Egwene, who thinks she's doing good, but she is, as we will get to here in a little bit, realistically, she's the tyrant. And so we've got all of these things. There is no good answer. Lelaine and Ramonda would be a closed-minded, more of the same, like the Uniparty in real life.
Mhm.
And Egwene is well, she's what we all think she is.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it with Ramonda and Lelaine. It's like the Futurama election episode with two guys that look exactly the same and say the same thing, just phrased slightly differently. And that's
Mhm.
what they are. It's a matter of ego of you'll ruin everything. No, you'll ruin everything. Ladies, you're gonna end up doing basically the same things. You're
Yeah.
only different on a few issues, really.
The only thing they agree on is they think Egwene will ruin everything.
Hmm. Um,
Well, and also they're really, uh, I think one of their big character flaws they both have, which is on purpose, is neither one of them would be happy with ruling through Egwene.
mm,
They want to be the figurehead until Egwene, which they assume is going to be after they're long gone and dead and retired. You know, because Ramonda wants to be the head of the hall. Lelaine wants to be the head of the hall.
yeah, well,
And
one of them
that
says something to that effect of uh when she says that you have some
Ramonda,
promise. Yeah,
yeah,
you've got
she's
some
getting the
promise.
reputational damage
Hmm.
going. Oh,
But
you were in charge of this. You're the one who put Myrel forward, who did all these stupid things, which she didn't. She just couldn't stop Nynaeve and Elaine from doing all the stupid things
yeah,
because of their own rules, basically.
but Ramonda says something along the line of like a few decades. So yeah, she's expecting that
She said,
she
I
will
think
probably
50 or 100 years.
yeah. So she will either be dead or retired again, is what she's expecting. In the
Mhm.
meantime, I'm going to run things because I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep you and the lane from messing everything up, and then vice versa when the lane comes in. just
And
a
they bring
different
up a little
approach.
history with where apparently her retirement might have been partly sprung from Tamara being elected Amirlan, and
Oh
then
yeah, I'd forgotten that.
subsequently later Swan.
Um,
Which makes you wonder why she came out of retirement. She could have been at like Adelaide's and Van Dien and just kind of stayed in her little hut and washed her hands for a while.
well, I assume it was the um reported stilling and execution of Swan. And okay, well that was one of my rivals. That was one of the things that kept me from being Amarillo, and now she's gone. So things are a mess. I think it was partly opportunism of things are a mess, so now I can be in charge, and partly what we actually see when we see her, which is the egoism of I'm the one to fix this.
Or even if we're just putting things in people's heads, you could imply that this might be part of the goodness. She could have seen the injustice of that and said, "Wow, Elida has gone too far."
Mm.
And all
Um,
these things can be true at once. That's the great thing about it all with people. Every single one of those things could all be equally true. And yeah, it's a complicated character, but it's not necessarily a good character.
um,
And even Brian's a tough case because you want to say he's good because he's being very honorable. He's protecting Egwene. He's obviously making decisions based on his feelings for Swan. But at the same time, he is backing the tyrant.
well, because in his mind, I don't think he sees it as a tyrant. He sees it as a chain of command.
Well, I think in his mind, he sees two options, and it's better of the two.
That too. But well, we'll
He,
we'll get to that
he
when we get to it.
realistically, I mean, there's a lot of hints that he's based on him a lot, but he's very much a Robert E. Lee.
Yeah.
Why was Robert E. Lee a Confederate general? Well, because he thought that was the side in the more of the right.
Well, he personally um disliked slavery. He thought it was wrong. But he also had this sense of honor and duty, which put his state, or as uh, Shelby Foote says that uh, Robert E. Lee wouldn't have said state; he would have said my country, and by that he meant Virginia. So
Mm-hmm.
he put that above all else. So even though he had these personal ideas, it didn't matter because honor and duty came first. And Brian is like that a lot. And so and that's what I mean by chain of command, I think, is that to him, she's the Amarillan. She's the one in charge. He doesn't care if she's only 18. We get a bit of this in that spiel that Bashir gives. I think it's in Lord of Chaos where Rand asks him, you know, everyone's worried about me going mad. You don't seem to care. And he tells the
Yeah,
story
about
about the kids.
the crazy general here.
It's like he knew what he was doing. And and besides the fact that she's the one in charge and the chain of command is important, I think he's savvy enough to see she's actually really competent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's actually really competent, and the the Hall and the other sisters don't really care about the army and the men in it. They're just tools. But Egwene is much more human. So I think that also appeals to Brine, that she sees that um well kind of he basically says that when he goes to the little hall, to the little cabal that was running things before they had a hall in Egwene, where he says, I run the army. You tell me what to do, fine, but I decide how it's going to get done. And if I say it can't be done, you're going to listen to me. If you still say go do it, I'll go do it, but I decide how it's done. And he says in that spiel about how uh, I've seen good men wasted because a noble thought they knew better, and I think that's a lot of why he has gravitated to Elaine or Egwene as the boss.
Because she lets him do his job.
Mm-hmm. And because she's much more human than the other Aes Sedai because she hasn't been quite as infected by the Tower and by the Aes Sedai mystique yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's much more willing to be honest and emotional.
Well, I
So
think also, and I think the clouding of his judgment with Swan is part of this.
yeah.
He also underestimates Egwene.
Hmm. Hmm.
If he thought she was that competent at this moment, he wouldn't be so protective.
That's true.
So he thinks he's protecting her from the machinations of the hall.
All right. So I want to jump to page 359 of the paperback. It's still in
What's the
this first
still in
chapter
this
that we're,
chapter?
yeah,
What's
chapter
the
15, Stronger Than Written Law. It's where Sawan, um, it's where Sawan goes off on this long uh soliloquy about the three oaths. Give up, Sawan
hmm.
laughed. Um, to me, this is an answer to something that Scott said a while back when we were talking about Egwene, and that you kind of agreed with, I think, about how well, and not just the forums back in the day definitely thought this, that Halima was manipulating an Egwene because early on, Egwene is very kind of hardcore of I'm going to change the White Tower, including things like the three O's. She didn't like them early on.
Hmm.
She thought they hindered more than they helped. Uh, I don't think it had anything to do with Halima. I don't think it had anything to do with um, going native. It,
No, I think
I think a lot
Halima's
of it had to do with
more.
Swan.
I think Halima's more trying to probe her dreams to see what she's going to do.
Yeah, as well as probably kind of insert some things there to kind of push her where they want her to go. Um, but I think that idea that uh that Egwene didn't do all these things that she was gonna do, I think that's because that was Jordan showing her youth that I know better. I'm going to change the world. And then you get into the world and you realize, oh, the world is more complicated than I thought it was. And some of these fences are here for a reason. And she still does tear down a lot of fences,
Hmm.
but she also recognizes I need to be careful. And I think this is Jordan showing us why she is shifting on some of these things, because Sawan makes a very compelling case. You don't have to agree with it here, but Sawan shows that the three oaths aren't just tradition, that
Hmm.
they serve a very valuable purpose.
Which is a little bit cool with the way Jordan did New Spring, because you see the moments in New Spring when Moiraine and Swan question the three oaths, and now we fast forward 20
Yeah,
years.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, his his sequence I don't think is an accident. You know, when you look at even just chapter sequence and the book sequence as well, is I think that's a big reason that New Spring came out when it did, because um we're still not, Moraine's gone, but we get quite a bit of Sawan, the person, here in this book, because there's no Matt, so a major component is the Egwene storyline. It's kind of bigger than it was in the previous couple of books because there's no Matt, because there's less going on, so she gets more screen time. So I think that's probably a reason that he put it out when he did, so that um you could see where she started. And
Okay, just a quick aside to one of the comments, because I think it's the perfect spot.
mm,
Scott, this is your time, because you teased it in the last episode's comments. I'll save the character assassination of Egwene until you talk about her again. Well, this show is all Egwene, so let it rip. If it's a spoiler, please put that ahead of the comments.
oh yeah, yeah.
But yeah, we will have plenty here, and as we opened this episode, my opinion. Uh, as
um
but yeah, it is important that Swan's her grounding. If there's any grounding, it's Swan, and
Good point.
and that goes for the rest of the books up until the very end.
Yeah.
And Swan's grounding is Brian.
Hmm.
It's put yourself in. This is where theory of mind comes in. Put yourself in Swan's place. She just lost her job as the most powerful person in the world. It was done violently. She lost another thing that made her one of the most powerful people in the world, and it's a thing that you basically have a soul version of a phantom limb syndrome, where you can feel it all the time, but it's just not there. And then you finally get it back, but it's nowhere near what it was. And anybody who has aged over the age of 25 and has had an athletic career or physical accomplishments knows what it's like to look back and say, remember when?
Hmm.
Remember when I could? And with these Aes Sedai, as they grow older, they never lose their aptitude for the power. But she did. You look at Cadsuane, the oldest one there is, and it's because of her strength in the power. Her continued strength in the power is why she can live so long.
Hmm.
Whereas Swan now not only is diminished in her power, but maybe us as readers, maybe she's getting it or not, that diminishes her lifespan.
Hmm.
That just diminishes her, period. So now she's got to figure out a way to cope. And her coping is all this other stuff she's doing. She's living vicariously through her kid, which is Egwene.
Yeah.
She's the baseball dad saying, "Slugger, go!"
I'd never thought of it in those terms, but that is a really good way to explain who Sawan becomes in the last 2/3 of the series after, she gets deposed and stilled. That's a really good way of putting it. I couldn't sleep last night. I went on this YouTube rabbit hole of I don't know how, I don't even remember how I got there, of old wrestling stuff, because back in the 90s, early 2000s, I followed a lot of wrestling because it was fun. Um, and I watched some interviews of Undertaker, which is
Oh, that wrestling. I thought you were talking collegiate wrestling and
no.
Olympic wrestling.
Uh,
Oh,
although that's fun too. Um, but Undertaker's loads of fun now because he was one of the last relics of the old style of staying in character, of never breaking the character. So he never did interviews while he was working. Um, and I found a fun little podcast called Hawk vs. Wolf. Tony Hawk and somebody named Wolf. Apparently he's a skater, but also did some MMA. I'd never heard of him before. British guy. Um, and it reminded me of way back when we talked about Ronnie Coleman. After I watched that documentary on him, and just, to me, it was sad how broken he was. But you pointed out he wouldn't trade a thing. He wouldn't change a thing. To have, what was it, 8 consecutive Mr. Universes or whatever it was. He doesn't care what he is now. That's what matters. And it was funny listening to these guys, because they're all, you know, in their 40s or 50s, all three of these guys, and none of them can do what they used to do because their bodies are so broken. Um, Taker has had, not full replacements, but I forget what they call it, where they go in and they put titanium caps on the femur head and on the cup there. He's had both knees fully replaced. So he's had all these things. He blew out both orbitals during his career. And then, Hawk, they were trading injury stories and laughing about it because that was the time they were most alive. It didn't matter that they had to go through all this literal pain. Look at what we did. Look at what we accomplished. Look what I can point back and say, man, look at that. You know, uh, look what I did back then. And so the fact that they can't hardly move here in the latter half of their life, they don't care.
yeah, mine's not nearly as bad, but this side that exploded and broke every rib from here down, that ended my MMA career. But I would never trade that I was doing MMA and getting out there in front of thousands of people and being in a fight. I would never trade that. That's one of the proudest things I've ever done, because I had to overcome not only the physical challenge of it, but the stage fright challenge of it. And those were both big deals for me. It's just a matter of course that, okay, a freak accident happened during training, or actually during coaching, And I ended up breaking all those ribs, and then there was a baby on the way, and then life happens, and said, well, I'm not going to the UFC, so I might as well concentrate on my career. That never would have happened if I didn't train MMA. But I would never take that back. Who knows? I mean, it does bother me sometimes, but who knows what it's going to be like when I'm 80? I may be walking around going, there's rain coming, my ribs are hurting, you know? But yeah, it'd be like, oh yeah, grandson, this is how I got this injury. You know, it's just, that's what's going to come out of it.
Well, because that's just who you are. And we get that way back in Fires of Heaven when Min is asking Sawan, what are you going to do? What's your plan here? When it becomes clear that Sawan's got a scheme, she's going to do something. And she basically says, I'm going to do whatever I can because that's who I am. I've dedicated my life to this cause. I'm not giving up just because, as you said, she's been greatly diminished. Okay, but I still have a mind. I could still do stuff.
And what's the other option? The other option is what they've been trying to keep Logain from doing.
Mm-hmm. Just laying down and dying because you've lost.
Laying down and dying, you know, or offing yourself, and which is what happens to so many of these people. And you say, oh, well, she can channel again. She got it back. You know, yeah, no, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's an addiction. I think I said it at the beginning of this reread that a lot of the things I saw in the later in life reading of these things, how so much of the one power is like addiction, chemical addiction. And I don't know if Jordan was speaking from experience or if he was speaking from knowledge, but he hit it right on the head of how it is, you know, a heroin addict versus someone who can channel the power, or an alcoholic, or any kind of addict. It's so much like that. And then you take it away and then you're a husk of yourself, and sometimes you're a better person. But most of the time you just slowly die.
So moving along a little bit, something just kind of jumped out at me because of what you said about the revelations of New Spring, about taking a break to see Sawan 20 years ago and now jumping back to where she is now. So a couple pages later, when suddenly pieces clicked in Egwene's mind like a blacksmith's puzzle coming undone. Shocking pieces. Sawan was in love with the man. Nothing else made sense. Everything she knew between them altered, not necessarily for the better. She is completely shocked, and she tells Sawan, you can box Lord Brian's ears or bed him, Sawan, but you will watch yourself with him. You will not let slip things he mustn't know yet. Do you understand me? Sawan jerked stiffly erect. I'm not in the habit of letting my tongue flap like a torn sail, mother.
Well, this is where experience comes in too. We talk about her lack of experience. Later in that paragraph, if she had not had her experience with Godwin, she would not have, this wouldn't have clicked for her. She would not have that understanding.
But there's a layer for us, the reader, underneath there, because we know Sawan used to canoodle to get what she wanted, or she at least did at one point, and she was apparently good at it. Apparently, Sawan's a good kisser. So we know
for
her
a footman, anyways.
Yeah, we know her history, and so there's an added layer there when you remember that, and then see both Egwene's shock that, oh my gosh, Sawan can love a man, and then Sawan's indignation. So there's kind of a double indignation there of, you know, my cause comes first, but also, you know, something maybe she doesn't want to say out loud. Hey, this ain't my first rodeo.
I think we're giving the footmen too much credit. I've put up with a bad kiss to get to the rest of the stuff before. So she may or may not be a good kisser. The verdict's still out on that. We do know from context clues that she's at least attractive, though.
Yes. So on to the next chapter. Well, before that,
I guess we jumped the gun earlier because this is where you get the Lee Lane and
yes,
Ramonda stuff.
The last couple of pages here, and then the the first page is here in chapter 16. I love a good heist movie, especially the kind of Ocean's 11 kind, where you see the pieces, but then you don't see the reveal until the very end. So you think you know what's going on, but then you see the reveal of the whole caper. And I think that's one of the reasons I like this series of chapters so much, is the way Jordan gives you hints, shows you that they're scheming, but doesn't tell you what the scheme is
Hmm.
until the sudden reveal at the end. So it's kind of like a heist, where they're scheming, they're planning. You think you know what's going on. The bad guys think they know what's going on, but nobody has the full picture until the reveal. All right. So did you want to jump then? Did you have any more about Ramonda and Lelaine, or was there anything before that you
No, I
wanted to
think
talk
I think
about?
we beat that horse. But we get a little glimpse from a perspective that we rarely get is Arengar,
Mm,
Halima, and this is again Jordan was ahead of his time. He wrote the best trans character in fantasy history, and it's Arengar. And but no, I'm serious because in just 2 paragraphs, not only do you get kind of what she is doing with the hiding of the body, which we find out who it is pretty quickly, even though it doesn't explicitly tell you, you pretty much you know who it is. Uh, but at the same time, her internal conflict with her bodily hormones and her old knowledge of her old self. And again, best trans character ever written from the problematic author Robert Jordan.
it's a good point. That as she becomes used to the body, or which she has at this point, because she's been doing stuff she's been around for a little while now. And I think at one point, is it in here where she kind of thinks about her previous life, is she still kind of remembers, but it's like a dream. uh
Yeah, I'm on. Let's see. Ahead, some of the men in the camp finally noticed her and straightened from their tasks to watch. In spite of herself, she smiled and smoothed her skirt over her hips. It was difficult now to really remember what life had been like as a man. Had she been such an easily manipulated fool then? Getting through the swarm with a corpse unseen and difficult even for her, but she enjoyed the walk back.
yep.
But yeah, the going back to her, was I that much of a fool as a man?
Hmm. Yep.
Which is actually a good lesson for us all as men, because you do have to take that step back every once in a while and be like, wait a minute, does she really like me like that, or am I just wanting her to like me like that?
Hmm. Am I just a simp? Am I just a fool?
Mm-hmm. Or in
All
some
right.
cases, doesn't even matter.
uh
And then we get Lelaine and
and
they're
Ramonda.
talking about the sea folk. That was kind of a
Yeah,
busy
yeah.
work
um
section.
yeah, it was kind of a busy work section, but I
The
do.
main takeaway from that was Ramonda holding over Lelaine's head the fact that Lelaine supported my role
Yeah.
as the emissary, which is where we get kind of the dynamic of her pulling a little bit of power, but then it kind of gets switched later with something Lelaine does.
Yeah. um we also get just a little, we get a little bit of what you were talking about with Sawan. So it's 379 on in the paperback. It's after all the busy work. um uh
Marilil, not Myril. I kept saying Myril.
yeah.
She selected it's Marilil. Myril's still there in camp.
um Some falls hurt less than others, Swan said, as if to herself before ducking outside. It was a good thing she went so quickly, or Egwene might have given her an earful. I think Egwene has kind of missed the point there that I mean, I think Swan's talking about both of them. That, hey, look how hard and far I fell. Look what I'm doing with it now. Okay. So keep hold of your pride and keep your eye on the goal. So I think she's kind of talking about both of them there.
Well, but there's also the undertone of one of Swan's purposes is I know what mistakes I made, and I'm trying not to let you make the same mistakes.
Yeah. All right. I
Then we know Salame is is it Salami? Salame? Salame?
I could go for some salami. I'm hungry. I didn't have time
Do
to
they have a
eat.
pronunciation in that?
I just drank some protein powder after my workout and I'm hungry. Um, okay. So the end of the chapter is when Ramonda and Lelaine come in. Uh, I Before we get there, this is interesting to me, and I just kind of want to point it out and put a pin in it. Because this was something odd to me, and it takes a good long while to reveal. Um, and I'm curious if you or Scott or anyone else in the comments what you felt about this puzzle. So this is 382 in the paperback.
The ages?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Hall, Swan. If you know something about the Hall, I don't know anything. Swan cut in. It's what I suspect. She clicked her tongue in annoyance. Not even suspect, really. At least I don't know what to suspect, but I see a pattern. And again, back to New Spring. That's her thing. So if you were paying attention and remember New Spring, and I hadn't really thought of this before, Jordan's telling you, I think, that there's definitely something there. This isn't just her imagination because he gave you a big hint in New Spring that this is what she does. This is how she got to be Amarillan so young. Um, and then she goes on about the ages, and she lists you know who is who was already a sitter, who became a sitter in Saladar. And you also still see the discomfort that they don't like talking about age any more than they like talking about power. Um, and and she goes through that they're too young, and she's not sure what's going on here, but something's going on. Um, I don't know if maybe I or others who were going round and round in circles about this uh, back in the old days on the forums just made too much of it, or if this is something of a fizzle. But when you finally get the reveal way at the end, it just kind of fizzled for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what was the one we were talking about a couple episodes ago that I thought was a big fizzle? Uh, well,
Perrin,
we talked about the
period.
hammer versus the axe, and we talked about
Yeah.
this whole storyline of Perrin's. Yeah, was a big fizzle. And this is another one of those. I don't know. Seemed a bit of a fizzle to me. Anyway, but so I just wanted to point that out so that we remember to uh, uh, keep an eye out for it. I can't remember how many more times it comes up again before the reveal, uh, but it certainly had the forums going with people getting as in depth and nerdy as they could to try and figure out ages and try and make spreadsheets and charts. Um, so the back to the heist movie here. I like the way he closes this out with About as we expected, Egwene smiled with a wonder that touched her voice too. Swan, they couldn't have handed me the hall better if I had told them what to do. Uh, so again, he's giving you a big hint of of a scheme, but not really telling you the scheme. So you only think you know what's going on. Um, and then we get Sheriam here, which maybe we should talk about this in spoilers
Yeah.
because I'm curious if uh I'm curious what you thought the first time or two you read this, and if you picked up on what was going on here or not. Because I don't think I did until it was revealed way at the end. So we can talk about that in spoilers.
Okay. So Onto the Ice to me was just a very long descriptive chapter,
Mm-hmm.
uh, all the way up until they get to the meeting. So we've got like 10 pages of just describing things.
Yeah.
Uh,
I didn't mind it very much though, because Jordan is very good at painting a picture with words, and you had all this stuff that was happening in the camp. So I think it works. It doesn't become tedious to read through to me anyway. One, because it's written so well, and two, because you've had all this stuff happening, all this action happening, and now, he's setting the scene. I think it helps with the anticipation. I don't think it slows things down.
well, yeah, from a reading standpoint, but from a talking about it standpoint,
Mm-hmm. All right. So where do you want to jump to then?
the meeting itself.
All right. So that's still in this chapter though, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Because they introduce all the lords and then they don't use titles for the Morundians, which is, politics as usual. But then after a long speech where they kind of give voice their concerns, it's basically like, oh, well, none of that even matters because here's the deal.
Um, I think I'll save that for spoiler talk of kind of the pros and cons of how this meeting plays out. Um,
Well, definitely unintended consequences, but you get the gist of that in the next chapter.
yeah, but but I mean kind of the overall, I think Jordan is doing more than one thing as usual, that it's not just uh and Egwene's going to kind of say this outright in the next chapter when she, you know, flips the switch on her plan, that you had a group of nobles with an army standing in the way of Aes Sedai. That's not normal. I think this is an illustration, a microcosm of how much the world has changed. That it doesn't matter that these are rebel Aes Sedai, that they're still Aes Sedai, and they come here to overawe them, and they do a decent job of it, of displaying that, whatever you've heard, whatever you think, we are still Aes Sedai, and we're still bad mamma jammas. Um, but it doesn't work to the extent that the Aes Sedai, especially the older ones, would have assumed. They're used to just looming over somebody and saying, you will do this thing, and having it done. And the world is changing enough that that doesn't happen here.
Well, and this is this series of chapters is a good mix of Egwene progressing in her story, but also reinforcement of, again, that Aes Sedai hubris. Go back to the previous chapter. That one of the things we glossed over is her going over all the notes with Swan, and how many times, even in Egwene's head, as the young revolutionary one, does she say, "Oh, well, there can't be that many Shido," or "Oh, that can't be happening with Rand," or "Oh, da 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 da," these things that can't be or shouldn't be or da 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 da. because she just can't fathom that thought. But we know as the reader, all of those things are happening, and they are even worse than her reports are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
As Scott had pointed out many, many episodes ago, Egwene is an extension of the problems that the tower already had. And we get that from her own mind here.
Yeah. And I think that's another point of New Spring, is that those fractures were being laid 20 years ago when the Black Ajah was already there, it was already scheming, and it already had enough power and influence to take out 2 Amarillans, and then cover it up. So those fractures were definitely there, and this was definitely a long time coming. Um, uh, I like and dislike the next chapter. I feel like this is kind of a tease that we get Matt's symbol, just because he is accidentally influencing something that's going on here, but we don't actually get Matt.
Yeah, well, we get Talmanes, who I consider one of the other few good guys in this whole storyline.
Yes, yeah.
He's been kind of a good guy from his entrance. He is the young Dobrain, is what he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is pretty much entirely because of Matt's influence, because of what he does when he comes along with and forms the band. And he is already playing a major part here. We got a little bit of that previously when Brian was talking about, I think it was when they were on their way to find land and bust Myril, and he mentioned, oh, of course I've talked to him. He's the commander of an army. I want to know his intentions. I want to feel him out. And Myril lost it. So, but we already know that Talmanes is influencing events in ways Matt did not intend. But it is going to influence and impact events now and later. And then we get a little bit more here when Egwene goes up and talks to him.
This cracked me up because as we've done in our social episodes, I think of things in the dating relationship sense a lot of times. And in not so many words, Talmanes tells Egwene that, of course, I know you've been manipulating me, but it's not manipulating if I already knew. Mm-hmm. And I was still going along with it because I believe in this other end cause that could happen on the other side of this. Yeah, it's like, you thought you were manipulating me, yes, but I wasn't being manipulated because I saw what you were doing and I still agreed that this might be the right path. So you probably could have come to me and just told me that might have been the better avenue, yes, but we're still getting to where we want to go.
And it's a great reveal, because up until this point, really, you think that Talmanes is one of the good guys, like legit, not just not a bad guy, because there's a lot of people that aren't on the bad side, but they're not necessarily good guys because they're their own agenda, their egoism, exactly. So he 100% confirms, no, he's one of the good guys, and it will become, it's a great reveal because he is going to do more stuff later. He's going to be even more important later.
Well, and it's funny because in this book we get no Matt, but we do get an extension of Matt because that was very much Matt behavior. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know you're manipulating me.
It's a good point. It is. We're seeing Matt's influence on this otherwise reserved Karheen noble, and yet there's a touch of cheekiness to him now because he's been hanging out with Matt so much.
But also go back to even like the rescuing in the stone. It's like, I would have just done it. Just ask. Maybe a thank you here and there.
Yes.
You don't have to pull me around and do all these things. I would have done exactly what you wanted me to do. That's just ask. And you get that from Tomines here.
Mhm. Although before that, I do think we should mention, or at least I should mention, since um, uh, I am in the unenviable position of having to defend Egwene. She isn't completely changed. She's just modified her approach because she did drop that huge bomb of, oh, by the way, the novice book is open to any woman of any age if she tests true. That was a big effing deal, and that was really dangerous for her to go out on that limb.
Mm-hmm.
Even thinking, okay, the plan's coming together. It's not done yet. She doesn't have it in the bag, and she still has to deal with the Hall. So that was her going way out on a limb to do something that she thought was the right thing, needed to be done to help strengthen the tower, to help change the tower in ways that it needs to do. This is something that is one of those unnecessary fences.
We chalked that up to youthful revolutionary thinking, and she stepped off the bridge, but just happened to be over the deep part of the pool. It's
I also think though that it was opportunism because I do think to her this is one of those fences that needs to be torn down, and she knows she's never going to get it done through the Hall, and she's taking the chance that her plan is going to come together. Um, and so she's going to throw this out here now so that the Hall to preempt the Hall, so the Hall can't go behind her.
Well, and we'll give her the benefit of the doubt from a strategic standpoint. We see this in this next chapter with the law. They're preoccupied with that. So they're not thinking of the other move she's about to make.
That is also a good point.
Because the first thing Lelaine says when she jumps up, or was it Ramonda? One of them says, we need to address, it was Lelaine.
Yeah.
We need to address the opening the books to everyone. And Egwene was like, no, we need to address this other thing first. And here's the precedent for it.
So speaking of the next chapter, did you have any more thoughts on this meeting? Do you want to jump there now?
I was a little bit taken aback with her little back and forth with Lord Pelivar, because there was no resolution to it. It was almost like a useless encounter to me.
I think what's happening there is that it is useless for Egwene. I think Jordan is setting up Elaine's story to come, is what's happening there with Pelivar.
Just the fact that she doesn't have the support that you think she would.
Mm-hmm.
So some more for us, the reader, actually, for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Egwene, for Egwene, it's just an annoyance. But I think that's foreshadowing of, yeah, Elaine's not just going to march in and have it all be hunky-dory. All right, so the law.
The law. Yeah, the law.
All right. So, I do want to point out that the Wonder Horse Bella is still here and gets a mention because Swan is writing her. Let's leave that. Sheriam has a moment here where she's trying to feel out what the heck is going on.
Yeah, and I've got to read the little bits with Sheriam again in New Spring, because there's something with Swan and Sheriam that wasn't really context clued enough in this series. And I'm wanting to say there was something about her in New Spring that would lead to kind of that behavior, but it also might be the other things that are going on where she's getting beat in the dark. And somehow knows Swan is part of it indirectly. Or maybe suspects that that's where the whole inquiry that is very painful is coming from.
So we were talking about Brian, so we should point out his little moment here as they're riding back, where Egwene basically tells him without telling him, this may go south. I mean, Brian's smart enough to know she's scheming something. Something is up. And that there's going to be a very important meeting of the hall tonight. And it may not go Egwene's way. And Egwene's basically telling him, look, you have been very openly and strongly supporting me, not the hall, but me as the leader. And if things don't go my way, you may get blowback, so you might want to leave. And he says, no, I gave an oath. Which is fully in keeping with his character, but also kind of Saki's on back to pulling Sawan back into it, because that's why he's here. Is Sawan gave an oath, and besides the fact that he had this physical attraction that he wouldn't or couldn't acknowledge to Sawan, that kind of drove him nuts. Of who would give such a strong oath and then break it, and especially someone that he took to be not that kind of person. Because if you're going to be, if you go, oh, hey, check her out, check him out, and then they do something abnormal, it's going to be hard for you to accept, because you're like, I didn't think that was that kind of person, uh, and I didn't think I was the kind of person that could be fooled that way. I think is another thing that I don't think I've thought of before when it comes to Brian. Is I think that's probably another element to why he chased Sawan. Is I got to know if I was wrong. Was I completely wrong in reading this person? I think that's probably another thing that bugged him. All right, so then she calls the hall, and then shenanigans, and then we actually get off to the hall.
Yeah. So this is what really got me thinking about the Egwene Tyrant thing. She is banking on the fact that people don't know the actual law. She knows the one person in the room that knows the law, and we get several comments in her own mind that is like, please don't say anything, please don't say anything, please don't say anything.
That is the one thing about this sequence of chapters I don't like, because to me that's the big flaw in the heist plan. Is there's way too much banking on this one person not saying anything. I think it really
except she seemed surprised that person knew all these things.
I see. I don't think so. I feel like Egwene, because isn't somewhere in here she's looking at, or no, somebody else looks over at her.
Somebody else asked Takuma what the law is.
You literally remember anything you have ever read. You remember it word for word.
And to me, I got surprised from Egwene in her mind that this person was asked this question. Like, oh crap. I think she was planning on getting everything to go through, and then later on say, you can check the records, but this is what you just did for me.
Okay, so it is. All right, so it's 4:32 in the paperback, where she calls to question. She calls a question before the hall to declare war on Elida, and then Lane speaks, and then Ramonda speaks, jumps up and says, gets all snippy. And that's when Egwene says, a question of war cannot be shelved. It must be answered before any question called after that. That is the law. I do find it,
And this is where Janya asked Takuma, and she's like, oops, shit. She held her breath. The White Tower said soldiers to any number of blah, blah, blah.
Well, maybe. Maybe they did get sideswiped with this, but I feel like Sawan should have known that Takuma could do this because where is it? Well, first of all, no, we try not to get too political in our Wheel of Time, but just generally speaking, this is a little too real that the politicians don't know their own laws.
Yeah, I was going to say that this is a lesson in the fact that we should be giving uh, a civics test to run for office or something.
Yeah,
It's just
it's so so the executive makes this declaration and the legislature goes, "Wait, is that true? Is that how this works? Does anyone know?" Um, all right, so the point about talking about where is it? All right, so the last time the tower itself actually declared war had been against Arthur Hawkwing. Sawan said that now only a few librarians knew much more than that there was a law of war. Um, I feel like Sawan should have known that Takimo was one of those. Um,
well, remember Takuma is one of the new sitters too, though. This
true, but Sawan is, you know, is the Machiavelli of the tower. She
mhm.
she knows them all to varying degrees. And if so much of the plan is
Yeah,
going to
well, she
depend
she
on
might have
this,
known that character analysis about her, but not known what exact text she's read.
true, because it is who is it?
Because Janya
Janya
said, "I
says,
remember you saying that you read this once, and it would that might not be common knowledge outside of a few people."
yeah, that's a fair point. So that might be it. But I do feel like that's still the one weak point in this, whether they knew it and they were just hoping, or even if they didn't know it, uh, there's a lot riding on her answering just the questions she's asked and not expounding, which is what she does here. Is she's basically being a hostile witness, and you're kind of left to wonder why, because she
Well,
could have
especially
blown
since
all
she
this
didn't
up.
stand. If she had stood, I would have
Yes,
understood that
yes.
she knew what she was getting into, and she didn't want anybody else to know until the end. But she didn't stand, which means she didn't agree with the decision.
Hmm.
And not agree, that's the part that doesn't make sense. She didn't agree with the decision, but yet she had the information to keep other people from agreeing with the decision.
Hmm. Yeah,
Though
yeah.
I think that's where the talk of etiquette, which they keep saying these sisters kept breaking etiquette, maybe she was holding etiquette.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe that's why she looked so uncomfortable. Um, because we don't know all the parliamentary procedures, but perhaps she only could have expounded if she was asked more directly, or asked to speak. Um, and she's that may be it. I just wish Jordan would have given us at least a hint that that's what was going on. Is that um, because when she first talks, it's it is, she said finally, and clamped her mouth shut. So that could be reading into what you're thinking is she wanted to speak more, but that wasn't what she was asked. And so
Mm-hmm.
maybe her clamping her mouth shut is her struggling with herself of, I think I see where this is going because I know the law of war, but I
Which
have to
to the
follow the
fault here, we
rules.
could use this in our own Congress now because they have the need to have their own soliloquy with everything that they are asked or do
Yep.
ask.
Yep. So, and maybe she's, if she is such a stickler for things, then it could be that she wants to speak up, but no matter what Ramonda and Lelaine are going to do when it comes to etiquette and breaking the procedures of the hall, she's not, because she's not that kind of person. But still, whatever it is, ultimately in the end, um, Egwene gets what she wants.
All the power. A state of
Um,
emergency. I wonder how that works. And a pandemic of sorts.
Um, what do we
But
know
but
about Moria? Because she's the one that
Moria, no.
ultimately puts them over the edge.
Okay, so they actually set that up earlier in these chapters that we went over. Because remember, as Swan is going through the older versus younger and everything, Moria was the wild card. Moria was the only other one old enough to be in there other than Ramonda. And she is the one that's not a lackey for Lelaine or Ramonda. She's kind of the wild card of the whole thing.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, so it had been set up. I'd forgotten that so she is the wild card and she goes Egwene's way. So she was
And
the
she's
sweet
also a
touch.
blue, which is going to have exceptional hate for Elida.
Yeah.
She's a
So
blue and she's not part of this new age scheme. So there's those two things. So she's the outside of the bubble character in all of this. And
um
realistically, you can see that kind of reaction with the way they've set up the animosity between the blues and the reds. Because Elida's the way she is towards the blues in exactly the same fervor that Moria was right there. Yeah.
I also like that she did steal the stolen staff, doobie doobie doo. So it's nice that we get some Ilianer speak here. Doobie doobie doo.
What was the meme? The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, and then it's like it do be doing his thing. No matter what the thing that you do would do think it be doing.
Oh yeah.
That was one of the best memes of the whole thing.
I need a
I can't
t-shirt with
take
that.
credit for that one. I found that one.
Um, so I like the I'm curious
Oh,
since
oh
you're
wait,
the one calling her. Go ahead.
the last sentence there. We were just talking about her. I, I don't know why it didn't stick in my mind. This time, the silence was broken only by the sound of Takema weeping. So she did know what was to come out of it, and she had something in her character that would not let her speak up.
hmm hmm Um, yeah, I think that's the only thing that makes sense given her reaction
Mm-hmm.
to what happens here. But so I'm curious, to me, this reveal of, the scheme you thought you knew, no, this is what it really was. So here on 437, right before the end of this chapter, um, when Ramonda is being snooty and snarky, and then Egwene cuts her off with, I don't think we can. Takima, what does the law of war say about the Emerillan seat? Ramonda was left with her mouth hanging open. Eh, this lands so well for me in large part because Jordan did such a good job of setting Ramonda and Lelaine up as foils, as antagonists, without them being bad guys. If he had done any more, it would have made them cartoonish, and I don't think this would have worked as well. But seeing Ramonda and Lelaine get their comeuppance makes this incredibly satisfying. Um,
Which is the danger of character assassination, because so many times the person on the right, not right of the political spectrum, the right as in the correct path, has so many flaws that you can get your way by accentuating those flaws in them, even though your way is not the good thing. We've seen it many times over history.
yeah. All right, so that brings us to the end of Egwene's chapter, and then we're going to get into Elaine, a big chunk of Elaine before we finish up with Rand. Uh, and then we're done with the book. So we started slow as usual, but we made pretty good time these last couple of episodes. So
Yep. So we're thinking two to the end.
yep. So let's pause there because I'm old and I have to go to the bathroom, and then we'll have a wee bit of spoiler talk.
Spoilers and comments coming up in just a moment.
All right. So jazz hands, spoiler time. Go away if you're reading this for the first time, because there are going to be a couple of major spoilers. The only two things really that I had to talk about were major spoiler things. The first one is Sheriam, there where she's getting the crap beat out of her, and it gets worse later. Um, did you figure it out before the reveal at the end that she's black, and so that must have been Halima? I can't remember if we're
Well,
ever
even in my
explicitly
first read,
told.
I thought she was black with the gray man in the tower.
Mhm.
So she was one that was never a surprise for me. There were some that were surprises, but she was one that definitely wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know how much of it, how much was a surprise to me versus how much was just a disappointment because she's so likable.
Hmm.
Um, so it was always, yeah, I see the evidence, but I think it took me a couple of reads to say, yeah, that's probably like Halima or someone beating her up because she probably is.
Yeah, from actions, there's no surprise, and especially since we've seen a pattern of uh, the blacks being exceptionally good at getting in places of power, like the Mistress of Novices or
Yeah.
the Keeper in Alviarin, because they're able to lie. And when you're in a group of people that are assumed you can't lie, then it's a massive advantage. It's probably the biggest advantage of any group in the entire books. Uh, but at the same time, what we don't get from Sheriam, which unless you remember something that I don't remember, we never get her motive. With a lot of the Black
Yeah.
Sisters, Leandrin, Alviarin, uh, the Forsaken, that their motives for being evil, we get the motive behind it, but with Sheriam, I don't think we ever do.
I don't think we do, and it is kind of a bit of a curious mystery because you're left to wonder because there's
Yeah,
that
like
moment.
Delana, we know she's a black, but she comes into the scene as a black,
Yeah.
and we don't need to know her motives. But with Sheriam, she's such an integral character that we should at least get an insight of why.
Yeah, and one of the things you're left to wonder is when as well because uh
She seemed pretty cool in the New Spring.
in New Spring, and there was a moment there where I don't remember who, one of them almost spilled the beans in front of Sheriam, or I think Sheriam overheard something and they had to like cover it up real quick, if I remember correctly, which would have been really bad, especially reading New Spring when you already know for sure that Sheriam is black. So you're left to wonder, um, when did it happen, and would she have been on the good side if she would have known and been part of their conspiracy? Would she have stayed true to the light, or would that she just have betrayed them to the dark?
Yeah,
Um,
and you don't get it. You don't get a hint of motive, but also you don't get a hint of character flaw. Like Elida, everybody thinks is black for the longest time when we
yes,
know she's not, because she has the character flaws that would push you in that direction.
and remember when it's revealed, um, Egwene Egwene thinks she almost looked relieved that the secret is out, and yeah, she's going to be executed, but it's done with now. And I'd wondered when I first read that, is that just because the torture she's been undergoing the past few months is done with, or is she kind of like
Like the
Varen
kid
is,
that played with a Ouija board and then couldn't get
yeah,
out of it.
and then and so Varen and a few of the others, of this started for like crap, Ingtar, you know, he's the great example of, he gives you a great reason why. It's because man is doomed. Man is fading. It better to survive under the dark than be completely annihilated. But now I have hope and I regret what I have done.
Instead of Principal Skinner, you shouldn't give him the colored chalk. It says Principal Skinner shouldn't give him Nietzsche.
Yeah, yeah. So that is one of the disappointments with Sheriam, is that she is such an integral character, and there's some big holes there. As
Yeah,
well
and
as
there's
just the
yeah,
disappointment of, oh, I
again,
liked her, she's black.
there's no
Yeah,
character flaw that you can just point to that would say this is why she did this.
yeah, yeah. All right. So uh, the other kind of big picture thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit more was Egwene as the tyrant. And I don't think that's entirely fair, but I don't think it's done as well as it could have been. Because what I think he's going for here, because Jordan does lean so heavily on historical analogy, is Cincinnatus. The person who may not or may not have been real, but was um, the uh, the pinnacle of character in the Roman Republic, because Caesar was able to become a tyrant because that was in the law. Actually, he just manipulated the law, much like Hitler would do millennia later, manipulated the law and then installed himself in a never-ending dictatorship. But it was already within the law that really, in much the same way that Takima lays out there, of as one hand is needed for the tiller, uh uh pirate uh pirates of the Caribbean. In the age of sail, uh, pirate ships were very democratic. They actually had councils. They actually had votes. Unless you were engaged in combat, and then the captain's word was law, because it had to be, because you needed one voice when it came to combat. You needed everyone going in the same direction on the same team. And that was also in Roman law. So there was a uh, a statute for appointing a dictator for 6 months. And so the story goes that Cincinnatus was in his field, plowing his field, when representatives of the Senate came to him and told him that he had been elected dictator. So he put down his plow. He went and defeated, I don't even remember who it was. I think this is pre-Carthage. So he goes and he defeats whoever is the enemy, and then he goes right back to his fields. And so that's why he's held up as kind of the pinnacle of Roman republicanism, because he did what needed to be done and then he relinquished power. And I think that's kind of what Jordan is going for here, in the idea that Egwene is holding the power of a tyrant, but she doesn't have the personality of a tyrant.
I think she kind of does. We see that with her changing of the laws through manipulation with the opening of the novice books. You can agree that that's a good thing or disagree, but at the same time, she did it unilaterally through manipulation, and then in the same breath ended up getting absolute power over the military might of whatever they were doing, which includes their movement. Realistically, her power extends to dethroning Elida, but at the same time, the movement of the sisters themselves, you could make a gray area of, oh, well, we have an encampment here and we need to do this, and we may need to stay longer than a month. Maybe we need to stay, so this is one of those things where the power of one thing overlaps into everything else, because she can dictate everything that goes on to that camp under the guise of it being for the ultimate goal of getting to Elida.
Well, this is where she's not completely tyrannical. And I think there's a bit of it here, and then you actually see it in the next couple of books, that the hall is still the hall, and they're not going to give up power completely and willingly. So they're going to push back, and they're going to argue and debate over those gray areas. I think it would have worked better if something we've kind of complained about before is that the Sea Folk, we use that as an example, where the Aes Sedai are complete morons when it comes to the Sea Folk and their dealings with the Sea Folk. And so this group that used to be awe-inspiring, and they start to become cartoonish. And I feel like there's a little bit of that when it comes to Egwene's storyline, where she ends up having to be more tyrannical than she necessarily should have been, because the hall is really stupid really often.
Mm-hmm. Which is we can actually tie in the Sheriam conversation, which if Sheriam was a stronger character, This could have been the person that kind of tied everything together. It could have been the Hall is fighting, Egwene is trying to get this done, but the Hall is deadlocked, but Sheriam is the deciding vote. And Sheriam is the one that kind of becomes the glue between the Hall and Egwene can be a benevolent dictator through another strong character that's doing the right thing, but we instead have a character that's a dark friend for no apparent reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's my only real problem with uh Egwene's storyline is she doesn't have as good a villain. She doesn't have as good of antagonists as some of the other storylines do. That make them so well. Like Rand has numerous antagonists, and most of them are done really well. Samael's and Demandred, those are great antagonists.
Well, and that's I think you have a great point here, because I did want to bring up the difference between, because the rebuttal to what we've been talking about this whole episode is probably not from Scott, but from anybody who just came across it. Hopefully, you made it this far to get to the acknowledgement of your rebuttal. Is Rand's a tyrant too?
Mhm.
And so we talk about the parallels of Egwene and Rand, but we're talking about Egwene being a tyrant, or I am at least, and they would say, well, Rand's a tyrant too. What's the difference? Well, Rand's a tyrant in the face of these pure evils that won't let him be a benevolent dictator. He is trying to, from the beginning of the books,
Mhm.
to first of all, to not even be the emperor. But then once he acknowledges being that, to be the best one he can be, and then getting undercut every time he tries that. Whereas in Egwene, she's just all in. She never has imposter syndrome. She goes in and she's just like maybe a few thoughts here and there, but she's like, I know best. I know best.
Mhm. Um, oh, so I think that's why I like the climax of her Egwene's storyline so much, because that climax is when it's in Knife of Dreams, really. It is kind of her climax when she's the prisoner in the tower and she's put back in Novice White,
I was going to bring that up next. Yeah.
because she's finally face to face with her antagonist, and Elida is a good antagonist. Even though she does become kind of cartoonish, but Jordan's able to make that work. So standing up, going toe to toe with Elida makes that such a great climax. But then the build up to it could have been better if there would have been better antagonists. And then the denouement after that climax, it's who's her antagonist now?
But look at the difference between her winning over the tower versus her winning over the little tower.
Yes, that's a good point.
So this is where somebody like Moria could have come in, because she could have made an ally with Moria, who she respects as a mentor, as well as working with Swan, as well as all of these other things. And Moria been that deciding voice that got up and said, look, this is what's going to happen, but this is what's necessary in the moment, versus Moria being a useful idiot in the process. And this is one of the problems with the whole tower arc and the rest of the stories, is the Aes Sedai are useful idiots the entire rest of the way. And
Especially the rebels.
yeah, especially the rebels. Yeah. And so instead of her being a tyrant, she could have worked with somebody in the hall who actually understands what's going on here, who is actually outside of Lelaine and Ramonda's schemes, and who could have been the deciding voice with enough oomph to it to say, with honesty, say, this is what we have to do. And she has impressed me, and she is going to be the leader you need her to be.
And you actually get that
instead of manipulation.
Yeah. You get that a little bit with the pre-Hall group that she manipulates them, and she kind of forces them into this very unprecedented
swearing of oaths, tyrant.
swearing of fealty to her.
Yeah.
But then she wins them over because she thinks about how well they're working together, and some of the others kind of think and point out their kind of grudging respect for her once they're brought into
Yeah,
Egwene's
but you forget
confidence.
this is how cults work.
Yeah. But the
They
point
post hoc justify their decisions from before.
the point is, but she's also proves that she knows what she's doing. She proves competence to them, but you don't really get that with the rest of the hall. And that's, to your point, there should have been someone like a Moria or a third way, a counterpoint to Ramonda and the Lane. She should have been able to develop her own group of allies within the hall in the way that she did with that pre-hall group. And we never get that. And so the in a lot of ways, the whole Rebel Tower kind of is a fizzle when you put it in that way, because Egwene's storyline, her climax is great, but then the resolution of the rebels is kind of okay.
Well, I feel this is where Jordan is a victim of part of his own style because he does parallel people so much, and it's there's no kind of ambiguity that Egwene and Rand are parallels, and Rand is in the point of tyranny right now, and so Egwene is kind of taking that same path when you really could have made them more individual, and so because he does do these parallels, it's almost like he kind of forced his hand down this route when there were better options from a practicality, from a likability. I really think he wanted us to like Egwene, but so many people don't because he insisted on also the parallel. Because you still like Rand at the end of the books, but you never get that. You never get it back for Egwene. And yeah, she sacrificed her own life. Big deal, but it was so last minute that there was no build up to it, where Rand had a complete redemption arc in the last couple books. And if we even post hoc had we had that redemption arc for her, other than the last little decision she made to sacrifice her own life, then yeah, maybe it wasn't quite as good as Darth Vader redemption. It just didn't sit as well.
All right. Well, if you don't have anything else, I think we have a couple of comments.
Yeah, I addressed
Scott.
one of them already.
Yeah, the number on the oath rod, I don't remember where that came up.
Because we were talking about it was 111 on the one that Galena swore on, but it's 3 on the one that's in the tower.
Yeah, I think Scott's right that's just there were a lot of them. So probably just further reinforcing the idea that magic was so commonplace in the Age of Legends.
Well, and we talked about that there was probably a lot of them, and then we speculated. Our speculation was on what they were used for. We talked about it as possibly a rehabilitative penal system, where if you committed a crime, you had to swear to not commit that crime again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just pure speculation. That was kind of just fun.
Yeah.
Putting more into something than it really had to be.
It makes me wonder if there was a way to use it on someone who couldn't channel. Because so far as anyone in this
yes, because remember, a wise one channeled into the rod that swore Galena in.
Yeah, but I thought at some point it was said it would only work on someone who could channel.
But I don't remember that, but the person getting sworn in didn't have to be the one channeling. That's for sure.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're right. I think when we see it being done in the tower, I think the swearer is we'll get there when we get there. I think that's Crossroads of Twilight that we see that. All right, so I get the feeling at this point in the story that George is purposely avoiding tying any threads off. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and this is back to our point where I think he almost wrote some things too well. And then he got into a state, and anytime you've ever done a long complex job, you get into this state where you're just like, oh shit, I'm kind of in an impasse. I know what the end product is going to be, and I know how I started it, but there's this couple little things here that I can't figure out what to do with. And a part of designing the gym was like that for me, where I had the initial roadmap. We all had the plans and everything, and then after getting the equipment and seeing it in space, and then it just didn't make sense, and we had to play with a lot of things to get it right. And some of those we had to play with in real time with clients coming in, and it wasn't to the optimal result. And I think that's where he got in his creative process here, which is normal. And with this vast of a project, it's inevitable. I think it's a critique, but it's also understandable. Now with his Grendel comment, yes, obviously we all know Beowulf. Hopefully everybody in this audience knows Beowulf. And I think it was nothing's, especially something this big, is not on purpose from Jordan's standpoint. When we think of Grendel, we think of hot, attractive, like I said, Marilyn Monroe, Kate Upton type character as far as looks, very seductive. That's why I use Marilyn Monroe. She's got that, some like it hot kind of mentality. But the use of the name Grendel is the ugly inside.
That's why I always thought, because none of his analogies are one-to-one, and so I always kind of thought of her Grendel as both Grendel and Grendel's mother. That she was a little bit of both. Because there is an element of seduction to Grendel's mother, where she's kind of trying to in her talking with Beowulf before he kills her. Tolkien wrote a very cool essay. I don't remember when he wrote it. As a professor, it's a scholarly essay on Beowulf, and it's a really great analysis of it. You can find it floating around out there in the public domain. If you want more to dig more into that just for funsies. I'm not sure if Scott had any other ideas of if there was more to it than that, and I don't remember ever reading anything about Jordan talking about the inspirations for her. So I don't know if that's
you
out
see it
there anywhere.
across the board, though. I mean, like Lews Therin, Lucifer.
Yeah.
And what was Lews Therin's fault? Was he reached for too much, right? He went for the throne.
His hubris. Yeah.
His hubris. He went for the throne and was the fallen angel, which is exactly the analogy for every dragon that has come forward. Is they're the biggest and the brightest, but at the same time they have this flaw of overarching pride that gets in the way of everything. And we're seeing that with Rand right now. We're going to see that in the climax of this book to a great degree. Samael, he's obviously again a parallel to one of the fallen angels, and his arrogance, his pride was what got in the way. So we see that across the board.
I hadn't thought about that. So I pulled up the Wheel of Time wiki real quick to see if it had anything from Jordan about her, and I forget that she gets a new body at the very end that is hideously ugly. So I'm wondering if a part of her name was the setup for where she ends up, because she does end up a hideously ugly monster person.
Possibly.
All right, well, that's all I've got for today.
Same here. I think we're definitely set up for 2 episodes to finish this book. 200 pages, about 100 pages an episode.
Yeah.
And realistically, the Elaine stuff typically in this section of the books goes pretty fast.
Yeah.
Because
and a whole heck of a lot of it is going to be set up for later.
Yeah, it's just pushing the story forward kind of stuff. And then the Rand stuff at the end is probably where we may end up with like a 2-hour episode there, just because this whole book was meh going through. But what happens at the end there is
There's
so impactful for
yeah,
the
there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And
And it's a lot going on kind of thrust at you in this moment. Whereas everything else was kind of chronologically made sense. But then we get actually, this was the true chaos book, where at the end, disorder takes over. In so much in the fact that even physically, with the power, he can't do what he wants to do.
Yeah, I may go off on some tangents because I think, and I've never read this, but I suspect that a major influence for the end of this book was the Battle of the Wilderness in the Civil War. Because uh it's very similar in the way it plays out. So I'll say. So I'll talk about that when we get there. And next time we will probably be talking about The Sound of Freedom because I'm gonna go watch it this weekend.
Yes, we will be talking about that. We've got so much to talk about, including things like.
Oh, is there more stupidity going on still? Is this gonna hurt my brain? The hell? Hadn't heard about that. Well, that's interesting. I can't hear you. You're muted for some reason.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so everything I said while you were saying, what the heck is that and everything, you haven't heard about this?
No.
This is like,
Wow.
yeah. Okay, so watch Sound of Freedom. Then look up Timcast on with Tim Ballard. I want you to watch the movie first because there's a lot of spoilers in that episode. But he has Tim Ballard on there. But this is the first thing they talk about because they wanted a buffer between spoilers for the movie and their normal audience, so people had time to kind of like get off the thing. But yeah, we're. If anybody doesn't think this is escalation,
Oh boy.
yeah. So.
That really got out of hand. All right. Well, we'll talk about that next time then. Yikes.
All right, and I'll figure out what happens with the sharing screen and my sound going away before next time.
Hopefully. All right. See y'all then.
Hopefully, see you later.